and welcome. My name is Leslie Macklin. I'm a faculty in the art department, and I'm very proud to introduce a senior in our Bachelor of Fine Arts program emphasizing in sculpture, Jackson Sayler. He'll be presenting his thesis work for you all today, so enjoy.
Hello everyone. Like Leslie said, my name is Jackson. I'm excited to talk to you guys about art and ontology. It's a project I've been working on over the past several months. So why I chose this area of study is I found that I had a personal responsibility to figure out why I act in certain ways and why other people act in certain ways, and to determine the nature of my being. So some issues that come up with this type of question is, how do we study the nature of our being outside of ourselves? I find it's difficult to do so, like studying other people, to find answers to myself. And then also another reason I found this was important was to I think it's important to define why we're here and what that means before we implement any ethical code. To me, questions of existence trump questions of social justice. So an overview of my presentation, I'm going to be going over my process, the research that I've done, my artistic influences, and the discoveries and the conclusions that I've come to through those processes. So my process, I have a purposely time-intensive process which allows me to reflect not only on the readings that I'm doing, but also on the work that I'm producing. So I start with research that's mostly readings of philosophical writers, and then I'm reflecting on what those writings have said. Oftentimes this is on a run, or when I'm trying to fall asleep, or at the early stages it kind of consumed my thoughts, so I would think about it like almost the entire day. And then from that I would do sketches and drawings. I wanted these to be quick so that I could tap into my subconscious and find what my internal self was interpreting these readings. And then from there I applied that to sculptural and 3D forms. So I'm taking the drawings and applying them to a 3D form. This allows me to reflect on what the drawing says, what the readings are saying, all of that. And then finally, I'm looking at the whole thing and determining what it means about my existence. So some historical context. The two philosophers that I looked into were Jean-Paul Sartre and Martin Heidegger. These two philosophers are considered existentialists. Existentialism in general means that our existence precedes our essence. This arose kind of after World War I, which was a traumatic war, and made people question like our actions and our responsibilities within existence. Prior to that, most philosophers believed that we have like an essence about ourselves that's either given to us by God or whatever, and then throughout our life we live up to that essence. So a little bit more in depth on existentialism. What it is it hits points of free will. So we have free will and we are making choices constantly, and those choices are our responsibility to make. What it's not is allowing for excuses of circumstances to dictate what and how we interact with the world. So oftentimes people allow for a certain circumstance to dictate how they interact with the world, like their parents encouraging them to go to college, like saying, I have to go to college because my parents are making me, or something like I have to work because my parents want me to, or however those things come up, those would be not considered existentialist because you're making decisions based on other things when the decisions are actually coming from within. So Sartre has 3 points that I emphasized in my work. One is bad faith, the next is freedom, and then the self is not constant. So with bad faith, that's a term that he's come up with that in general means when we deceive ourselves and when we act in a role or a character. So an example that he brings up of this is a waiter at a cafe. The waiter acts really eager, he acts really precise, he's quick. You could almost say that he's like playing a character within that setting. So he's deceiving himself in saying that I play this role of the character at the time, when in reality he's just whoever he is in his daily life. So freedoms. He talks a lot about freedom and how we're condemned to freedom. And I say condemned because he says that we are responsible for all of our actions. And so when reflecting on that responsibility, it's a great responsibility to be responsible for every single action that you have in your entire life. And then finally, the self is not constant. What he means by this is those roles that we do play are ever changing. So for instance, I'm a runner, but in 10 years I might not be running. So it's hard to define myself by the role of a runner because that changes. It's always in flux. And people do this all the time. They're always defining themselves by a runner, an artist, a businessman, or whatever, but we don't know how constant that's going to be. Heidegger, so I also have 3 points from Heidegger. Care, death, and authenticity. He talks about care as a fundamental structure of humanity and that we all care about things. And he also says that we often care about the same things. He would call this everydayness. When he talks about everydayness, he says if we fall into an existence that's defined by everydayness, we end up living inauthentically. So from there, he talks about death, which is a means to an end considering authenticity. So he finds that the ultimate possibility, the ultimate thing that every human will for sure experience is death. And that to realize this is the best way to live an authentic life. He wants people to consider death kind of always, thinking about, I will die, this is going to happen. He talks about how we oftentimes forget this and oftentimes think that our being is guaranteed, as in, I'm a young man, I have another 40, 50, 60 years to live, but that's not the case. I could die at any moment. And he wants people to live authentically so that we have a better understanding of the nature of humans. So when people are living more authentically, then we can determine their fundamental structures more clearly. Okay, so that's the research that I've done. Now we'll go into my artistic influences. One is the Flatbush Zombies. They are a hip-hop group from the East Coast. The next is performance art, and finally, Cubism. So Cubism was an art movement that developed in 1907. It abandoned perspective. They wanted to capture how humans view the world in a flat 2D painting. So the way that they tried to do that is when you, say, scan a room, you're taking particles and pieces of information as you look around. And so that's why these paintings look like disjointed and disfigured because you're taking in like all of the angles of the world around you. I enjoyed this style because it just felt true with my expression, and then also it created good metaphors with how not only we perceive the world with our eyes, but also perceive the world with our mind. Next, the Flatbush Zombies. They, one of the artists in that group is Eric Ark Elliott. He not only is a musician, but he's also an artist. I felt that his style was very nice. These are some of his paintings. He also helped me to push myself in creating multiple ways of expressing myself. They have a song called Crowns. This song talks a lot about like death and our perceptions becoming our reflections and things of that nature. So they have a lot of paralleling thoughts with where my research had taken me. Finally, performance. So Madeline Alborn, she was an MFA student here. She wrote her thesis in a play format. So I kind of liked how that worked and wanted to try that myself. She encouraged me to take a performance class, so yeah, I decided to incorporate performance into my final thesis because I felt it had a direct connection with the audience. It allowed me to not only connect with them visually through my sculptures, but auditorily, visually with how I'm interacting with my figures and all of that. Another influence in the performance side was morality play. Everyman. Morality plays came about after the Dark Ages. Everyman is a play about a man who's going to die. When he realizes he's going to die, he goes to different parts in his life, like his car, his house, or his friends, and asks them to come with him. And in the end, the only thing that comes with him are the good deeds that he's done. So the outcome of my research is a metaphorical performance titled Further Thoughts on the Matter. It deals with three figures that I interact with that analyze and confront the existence and my existence as I know it now. So some discoveries that I've come to are I have two types of being. One that's elevated and one that's suppressed and comfortable, or one that's authentic and inauthentic. So from there, I wanted to represent those two states in a visual format. I decided to use a raft at sea because I felt like sea was like this open space that's kind of representative of my mind. So the raft is elevated consciousness. And then I built into my raft a coffin. This coffin is representative of my inauthentic state or death within life. And then finally, the sea itself, so the water, is actual death, like dying. So the figures are expressions of my thought. They live and exist in this authentic state. Those drawings that I've created have multiple faces. I think these have a couple of meanings. One is different perspectives. So I take on a lot of different perspectives depending on what situation I'm in, and I think a lot of other people do that as well. It's also a representative of my inconsistent personality or those different roles that I play within my life. And then finally, all of my thoughts are never original. They're made up of everybody's voices speaking to me and then conforming in one thought that feels like my own. So that's another representation of these faces coming to form within one face. So these are those drawings that I talked about. You can see the faces, you can see they're pretty rough, they're quick. And then so now I'm taking these forms and putting them into a three-dimensional form. So you can see the comparison of each one. I'm taking this flat, two-dimensional shape and then creating a sculptural form to interact with. So the performance itself is a balance and flow of my existence. So I'm kind of going in and out of my authentic and inauthentic state. I found that I don't really like either place. The inauthentic state is comfortable and easy, but that's not necessarily the way that I'd like to live my life. And then the elevated or authentic state can oftentimes feel very lonely and isolating because I'm only interacting with myself and my own thoughts and reflecting within myself, all of that stuff. These are pictures from my studio, just like a process of the creation of the raft. And yeah. So more about process. To build the figures, I'm using stucco mesh, and then I'm dipping fabric into plaster and then layering it over this mesh to create a sculptural form. Finally, I paint it so the figures are white and the sea is black. The whole piece itself is just black and white. I wanted the white to represent life and the black to represent death. So these are a couple pictures of the final pieces. Each of these are different figures. So a final conclusion that I've come to is, by reflecting on the authentic self, one is able to realize their freedom, acknowledge self-deceptions, and question their responsibility to create individuality. From here, I think it's important for me to share the work that I've come up with, because I want people to find their own ways and their own methods of finding authentic self, and to think about how they can create authenticity within themselves. Further conclusions is this is an ongoing investigation. Like I said at the beginning, it's really hard to come to concrete conclusions. I think I'll be looking into this for many years and creating work about this for many years. Yeah. And then finally, if you want to come to that performance, it's on May 10th. It's in the Claude Snook Gallery here at the Adams State Art Department. And there'll also be a lot of other work there as well. So thanks for your time. Any questions? Thanks for coming.